I know a lot of you already know Phyllis, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Phyllis Carey, she's a cooking instructor, author, and consultant, and works with all types of culinary creations. She is primarily a home-friendly teacher, helping students bring life into their kitchens with fun, easy-to-follow recipes. She has published 2 cookbooks and several recipe collections on topics that are sure to please any cook. Please check out her website with links to her Facebook and Instagram pages. And I'm going to add that website on the chat box, so you can have that easily accessible. But it's phyllis-carey.blogspot.com. But I will go ahead and add that so it's easy for you to follow. So please help me welcome Phyllis Carey.
This is very different, very fun. Actually, I'm so used to just cooking that it's kind of interesting to just talk. So I'll be talking today, and I'm going to be talking about tea, a little bit about its history, its production. I did a tea talk about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, for a group, and found it so interesting I did some more research and kind of put this talk together for you. Please do, if you have questions, as Nancy said, put them in the chat. We can talk about it later. There's also a packet of recipes that are available on their website. I'll talk a little bit about those at the end of the presentation if we have some time too. So let's get going. First of all, tea, strangely enough, is the most popular beverage besides plain water in the entire world. So people drink tea in many, many countries. Worldwide, it is a very, very large part of the culture, anywhere from the Japanese tea ceremony to afternoon tea in London. You'll see it pop up everywhere. There's even a wonderful song, children's song, I'm a Little Teapot, that focuses on tea. I always joke this was actually a song that was written in 1939. And if you stood up right now, I bet we could all stand up and tip over and do the teapot tip, and everybody would start singing the song. It's that well known around the world. About 3 billion cups of tea are brewed every year worldwide. That's a lot of tea. There are also quotes, which are kind of fun. We find from people as well as from books that include tea as part of the conversation. One is from The Wind in the Willows. I think The Wind in the Willows, we grew up with the book, but mostly we're used to it as the ride at Disneyland. But anyway, it says, come along inside, we'll see if tea and buns can make the world a better place. Tea is often thought to be something people sit down to relax, take a break, okay? It's always thought to be a very soothing sort of an experience. If you are cold, tea will warm you. If you are too heated, it will cool you. If you are depressed, it will cheer you. If you are excited, it will calm you. This is a quote from William Gladstone. He was a prime minister in England. Pretty much covers all areas, so tea obviously will take care of your life for you. My favorite quote, however, there are hundreds of these, but it's from Eleanor Roosevelt. Woman is like a tea bag. You never know how strong she is until she gets in hot water. So tea is everywhere. Chinese have been drinking tea for more than 5,000 years. The legend goes that in 2732 BC, Emperor Shennong was doing whatever he was doing, and there was a pot of boiling water with him. And strangely enough, some tea leaves flew into this pot of boiling water. It created sort of an interesting aroma, a wonderful look to it. So of course he decided to try it. I'm not sure that I would necessarily do that, but he drank it. He found it to pleasantly warm his entire body, give sensations in every part of his body, and it smelled really good too. So he proceeded to create sort of a medicinal product that people used for hundreds of years more. It wasn't really until 300 BC in China that it became a beverage, just a casual beverage. Before that, it was very, very medicinal and used to help people, which it is to this day too. Tea actually didn't arrive in Japan until the Tang Dynasty, about 600 AD. At this point, interestingly enough, China and Japan were on good terms. They were actually trading back and forth. The Buddhist priests would take tea. Okay, they actually took tea to Japan, where it caught on. The priests also finally brought some of the seeds so that in Japan they could actually grow the trees. These trees were cultivated, which was very lucky because a little while later, Japan and China were not very happy with each other and the trade stopped. At that point, the Japanese tea experience actually changed from medicinal to a little bit more ceremonial, a little bit more religious. And that's what we think of with the tea ceremony today. The tea that's primarily in the Japanese tea ceremony is matcha, which is a ground green tea that we'll talk about a little bit later. Tea didn't become a staple until in England, in the United Kingdom, until around 1600. Several years before that, about 30 or 40 years before that, the Dutch East India Company actually traveled to China, took some of the tea to India, and where it became starting to cultivate there. And then they started to import it to Europe. Very, very heavily taxed at that point. It was quite a bit of distance to get. When the tea came into England, it was so expensive that really only the aristocracy could deal with it. I mean, they were the only people who could afford to drink it. It became very, very popular because it was this specialty item. A little bit later, about 1785, the taxes were finally lowered. So people from other classes could enjoy the beverage a little bit more. And along with the heavy duty taxes, and the reason they finally lowered them, there was a lot of smuggling going on, and the East India Company was just losing money right and left. They seem to do that a lot over the years, as we'll hear a little bit about. Then finally, we get to around the 1800s, and this is when everybody's drinking tea, just everybody's drinking it. So it was a very, very popular item. Tea didn't come to the Americas until about 1650. Peter Stuyvesant brought it over to New Amsterdam. So he was a Dutch trader. He brought it to New Amsterdam, which is actually New York right now, so New York City area. And with that, the people just fell in love with tea. They've been drinking it at home. They came over here. At one point, I guess in New Amsterdam, they drank more tea than they did of all of England. So it was very, very popular. It wasn't for another 30 years or so that the idea spread to Boston. And then it became a little bit more of a staple trade between the United Kingdom and the Americas. Obviously, it was taxed. Okay, this seems to be a thing. And we all know about the Boston Tea Party. But the taxes were so heavy that it was getting to be very expensive. The East India Company was getting very upset because the smugglers were bringing in so much tea that they were losing money. So they were after Parliament to get them more money, and it became a big thing. The Tea Party, actually, the Boston Tea Party was, let's see, see if I can remember my dates here, December 16th, 1773. We always think of this as the beginning of the American Revolution. Actually, it was just a protest against this tax. England finally decided that they were not going to tax all these other things that the Americas were complaining about, but they left the tax on tea, so there was a little problem. So the ships were attacked. The ships were actually American ships. The Dutch East India Company had some tea on it they brought over from China, but it hadn't even come from England. Kind of funny, after the Boston Tea Party, tea was not as popular in the United States. It kind of ended that love affair with it. Coffee took over at that point. So coffee became, and it still is, probably more popular in the United States than tea. Although I think with some of the imports and the chai teas and the bubble teas and things, it's kind of catching up a little bit more these days. Another thing that was sort of fun that occurred in New York City during the tea craze time was there were some natural springs right in the center of New York. And the city, I guess, basically opened up tea gardens around these springs. They attached pumps to the water, and people would go and sit out and enjoy their afternoon tea. So it became very, very popular pretty much in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. So all of the trade areas. The Americans actually drink more iced tea than they do hot tea. There were some mentions of iced tea much, much later. Occasionally you see it written about in cookbooks as early as 1877, but it was really at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair that tea began, or iced tea began. It was very, very hot. The Richard Bletcherden had a tea stand. He was trying to give out free samples to everybody, and nobody wanted hot tea. It was just too hot. So he had the great idea, and he went and got a whole bunch of ice. He dumped it into his tea, and the tea concession actually became the most popular place in the entire World's Fair. They say next to the Egyptian fan dancers. They were just a little bit more popular, but close enough. At this point, the iced tea became, we have Southern sweet iced tea, we've got all the flavored iced tea, now we have bubble tea. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more. Chai tea is served cold and hot, so lots of different ways. Turkish people actually consume more tea than any other group of people in the world. Each person in Turkey actually consumes about 7 pounds of tea a year. The second most popular place is Ireland, and they're only about 5 pounds. England is a little bit after that, not too much after that. Turkey grows about 1/5 of the tea in the entire world, but they don't export it because they use so much of it. So usually we don't see too much exported tea from Turkey. China, India, Sri Lanka, and Kenya produce the most, and they're the ones who actually provide it around the world. Different blends from the different areas will actually create different flavors. So English breakfast is a blend from China and as well as India. So all kinds of different teas put together. The tea bag was relatively revolutionary, and that occurred about 1908. Thomas Sullivan was a tea trader, and before that, you had to make a whole pot of tea. Okay, if you wanted a cup of tea, you wanted to try some tea, you had to make an entire pot. So a lot of it was wasted. He had this magical idea of creating tea bags. So he took little pieces of silk, and he wrapped the tea leaves in that and tied them up. And then he could send a variety to these different companies he was trying to sell his tea to. And they would just have to dunk it into a cup of hot water. So they could try several different ones without all these different pots of tea. The idea caught on. Later on, they switched from silk bags to gauze bags, and then finally, of course, paper bags. Sir Thomas Lipton, he's the most famous tea person in the world here. Lipton tea was created. He was probably the first largest manufacturer of tea bags. There was a big influx of tea during World War I. The tea bag became very popular because tea bags were added to the rations for the soldiers. And so by the time they got home, it was just super popular with everyone. And after that, the tea bag was well established. Loose tea versus tea bags. Okay, so what's the best way? Well, still, it's considered to be the best way to use loose tea. And the reason is that you get more of the water flowing through the leaves. It's going to pull out more flavor, more aroma, more vitamins, all of the good things in the tea will come out a little bit better. A lot of people don't like to make an entire pot of tea because if they do, again, they may only want 1 cup, and it's very difficult to use the whole pot with just 1 cup of tea in it. So other things were created. Of course, there's tea balls where you can pack the tea in, a teaspoon, which takes the place of the tea bag. With all of these things, you just have to be very careful that you don't overpack because the tea leaves do expand and they grow. When you're using a tea bag, you will dunk it into a cup of hot water generally, and those pieces of tea in the tea bag are usually much smaller. Okay, so when the tea is produced, it's separated out, so the smaller pieces are actually placed in the tea bags. That allows the infusion to happen a little bit more quickly as time goes on. They've also created a new type of a tea bag. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's a pyramid style. A lot of times you're going to see it'll come to the table in a beautiful glass teapot, and the whole thing just kind of blooms, and you get the tea flower in the center of it. Those are quite beautiful and something a little bit different and new. The growing and processing of tea I find to be kind of interesting. We talk about processing tool, which I'll explain a little bit later, but when tea is all made, so tea in quotes, so real actual tea, all comes from the same plant. It's the Camellia sinensis plant. It's a small tree native to Asia. Obviously it grows in other parts of the world as well. This tree is the only plant that produces tea. Just like any other plant, if it is growing in one area, it's going to have a different flavor than if it grows in another area. I kind of liken it to chilies. Chilies grown in California have a different flavor than chilies grown in Mexico, but they could be the same chili to begin with. So with tea, it's about where it's grown and then the processing method to it. Once the tea leaves are removed from the tree, they're taken to the factory and they're laid out on screens, and they're left in a sort of a warm, humid area to wilt. They get kind of shriveled and wilted, and then they're rolled to kind of pull out some of the juices. This is then left to sit in a cooler area, and that is going to oxidize, get oxidation, fermentation. So things are going to change with the tea. It's going to shrivel up some more. It's going to come in contact with the air and just change its properties. This is the point usually when things change. Okay, now from that point on in the processing of the tea is when you get the different varieties of tea. For most teas, okay, about 85% of the teas will then go to a drying stage. They will continue to oxidize, they'll continue to ferment, they'll continue to dry, and then they will get very black, hence black tea. So black tea then has been sitting the longest, usually in this oxidation process. When the drying is done, the tea is now made. Okay, so this is the point where it's separated out. The bigger tea leaves are separated out and packaged in tins or packages. The smaller tea leaves are set aside for the tea bags, and those are then packaged up and sent to whoever's going to blend the teas. Green tea and black tea, again, are the same plant. Okay, it's the same plant. It's just that green tea, after that initial oxidizing portion, is not gone to the drying area. Okay, it's not going to sit for a really, really long time. It may dry for an hour or two. It may not dry that much. It holds its beautiful green color. The black tea then goes for a much longer period of time. There are also white teas. White teas, we'll talk a little bit more too, but those are picked really young. They're hardly oxidized or any kind of processing whatsoever. And another thing to think about too is that processing, I'm using the word process these days, that has a really bad connotation. When you process something, we think of adding things to it or breaking it down or changing its natural. That's not what this is. This is just the process that it goes through to end up being tea leaves. About 2,000 of the tiny fresh tea leaves will produce 1 pound of tea. And you can make about 200 cups of tea from 1 pound of dried tea leaves. Black tea is the most commonly consumed. As I mentioned, about 84–85% of all tea is black tea around the world. Again, processed, but not processed with any additives to it. It is allowed to ferment dry for a much longer period of time, hence it's a lot stronger in taste. Oolong tea is a slightly different style of tea. It's processed the same way that black tea is, but all of the steps are a little bit shorter. The original green color can be left in the tea, or it can actually turn black. It depends on the tea producer. Oolong tea usually has a milder flavor, very smooth. I like oolong tea. Make iced tea, it's a very good iced tea one as well. Some companies too, the leaves are actually, during the processing portion, are rolled like in little spirals, or they'll be rolled into bowls. So they have a slightly different look. Green tea, as we mentioned, is barely oxidized, so that last drying process is much shorter. It holds its green color. It is fresher picked, usually considered to have more nutrients because it hasn't been dried quite as much, although they kind of wonder about that now. Puri is P-U-E-R-H, is a different type of tea. It's very, very black tea, and it's now, you'll find it around in tea shops. It's more of a medicinal tea. They found that it helps, or it's touted to help lowering high cholesterol. So the leaves go through a much longer oxidation and fermenting process after they've been dried and rolled. This tea only comes from the Yunnan province in China. White tea, I've just barely, oh, by the way, the puri tea is usually served with milk and sometimes milk and honey. It kind of looks and kind of gets frothed up a little bit. It looks a lot like a cup of hot chocolate when you drink it. White tea, as I mentioned, is the least processed. The leaves are picked very young. They are barely dried, barely oxidized, very, very light. White tea, really the only ones that I've had, they're usually mixed with a cranberry or a raspberry, dried raspberry cranberry to it, so that you have the white tea is just mild enough that these flavors kind of come through. Technically, herbal tea isn't a tea, it's a tisane. Tisane is just a brewing of, or just resting of any sort of herbs or roots or anything else that you can think of. So any of your teas, like celestial seasonings teas, I think you're familiar with a lot of these. So herbal teas are made, chamomile tea, okay, that's an herbal tea that's made out of flowers. There'll be blends. This particular one is caramel apple dream. Sorry, I got carried away with that one. It's pretty good. It tastes like bananas. I can't figure out why it smells and tastes like bananas. There's no bananas in there. It's probably some sort of drying process that it has. Hibiscus tea, all of these spices and herbs are not really teas. They're very different. In order to be a tea, you have to come from the Camellia sinensis plant. So that's really important. Teas have different brewing requirements. So when you are actually making a cup of tea, you need different temperatures of the water for different types of tea. My sister's listening in on this one, and she was the one who told me about the teapot, that actually you can set it to brew the temperature of the water, or boil the temperature of the water to suit the type of tea. So there are electric teapots that you can do this for, which is really helpful. The herbal teas and the black teas need about 203 degrees. So here at sea level, it's 212 degrees is when water boils. So it's a little lower than the boiling water. If you boil water in a tea kettle, for instance, and then you put it into the cup, probably by the time that process, it's probably down to the right temperature. But if you're doing green teas or, green teas or white teas, they're a little bit more delicate and they really need a much lower temperature. They're about 185 degrees, which is quite a bit under the 212. This allows for the tea leaves to brew a little bit more slowly and the true flavors to come out, and also to limit the bitterness. Sometimes you get a little bit of bitterness from a green tea. Using a lower temperature water will help with that quite a bit. Brewing a cup of tea or a pot of tea. First of all, if you're doing a pot of tea, the best way is to rinse the teapot in hot water first. You can also do that with your cup. I do find that if I do a pot of water with my tea kettle, that I'll pour some of the very hot water into the teapot, swirl it around and dump it out. The same thing with my cup if I have extra. That way the tea is not shocked. So we don't want to shock the tea. Also this has to do, and we'll talk about the teacup a little bit later, but also it kind of tempers the teapot. So the boiling water, when you first hit, this is just a small amount of water to swirl around. It won't hurt the pot if you had a very delicate pot. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to add the tea to the pot. If it's a loose leaf tea and you're adding it to a pot, it's a spoonful, which is like a teaspoon size, a spoonful of tea per person that you're making the tea for, or cups, plus one more. So there's always, if you want 4 cups of tea, you have 5 spoons of the tea leaves in it. If you're using a tea bag, obviously you put it in the cup and you pour the water over the top of it. So that's pretty easy. But in either way, you want to agitate the tea. So if it's in a pot, I suggest you give it a little stir when you first put it in, and maybe once more. If it's in the cup, of course, we do the bobbing thing with the teapot, the tea bag, which is really fun. The water should be freshly boiled. So you should have fresh water that you boil. So in reality, you shouldn't leave water in your tea kettle and boil it for several days in a row. All the oxygen leaves the water at that point. That's the hardest part for me when I want 1 cup of tea. And I can mark that on my thing, but then I've got to dump out the rest. And I just like to leave it in there. I'm really bad. I probably don't notice the difference, which is ridiculous. Brewing tea is 3 to 5 minutes. So 3 for smaller amounts usually, depends on the temperature of the tea. A little bit longer, I find for green tea works better. The longer it steeps, the stronger it's going to be. So if you like a little bit lighter tea, then you want to drink it more quickly. If you like it stronger, you notice like in a pot, the 2nd or 3rd cup you have is going to be a little bit stronger. Milk, do you add milk? English add milk to tea quite often, especially English breakfast, Irish breakfast. They're very strong teas. The milk kind of smooths it out a little bit. Big question is always, do you put the milk in the cup or do you put the tea in the cup first? Which one goes in first? Well, originally the tea cups were very, very delicate. This one isn't particularly, but very, very delicate. And with the delicate teacup, if you poured that hot tea in it, it might crack it. So it started to become a practice that you put a little bit of the milk in the bottom and then you pour the tea into the milk and it just sort of tempered it and protected the cup. Nowadays, most people add the milk afterwards, whichever way you want to do it. Honey or sugar is added to tea as well to taste. I happen to be the kind of person, I like my tea unsweetened, so I never put sugar into it. I have gotten over the last couple of years hot tea in the morning. I love to put coconut milk in it. It richens it up. I'm also really bad, so if you're a tea purist, don't hate me. But this is a salted caramel tea by Bigelow. And a lot of mornings during the winter time, or even some afternoons, I'll brew a cup of tea and add a little bit of coconut milk to it. This caramel tea needs some milk or something in it to make it taste more caramely. And doing that is really fun because it gives me this creamy, wonderful texture to the tea, and it's a little bit more filling. So you can do that if you want to. Okay, tea varieties. So black teas. Assam tea is from northeast India. This is the deepest and the strongest tea. This is the one that you're going to find in English breakfast, Irish breakfast tea, sometimes by itself, but usually it's blended with some other types of tea. Ceylon tea comes from Sri Lanka. It's slightly spicy. It has citrus notes. It's really, really good as an iced tea. Darjeeling is from West India. It's medium bodied and it has a very unusual flavor to it. It is actually like, it's the champagne of teas because to be Darjeeling, you have to come from, the tea leaves have to be grown in one particular area in West India. So it's important that it's the same. I like Darjeeling, excuse me, tea. I love the flavor of it. I haven't had too much of it in the recent years, but I used to drink it all the time when I was younger. It's tasty. Earl Grey tea, another very popular tea. This is a blend of teas as well, as most of these are, but it's tea. This one actually has the addition of orange bergamot to it, which is adds an orangey minty flavor to it, very subtle, probably stronger in Earl Grey than in Lady Grey. This is one of my favorite teas as a tea bag. This is by Twinings. Sorry, it's a little bright. Lady Grey is a lighter version of Earl Grey, much easier to drink, makes great iced tea as well as hot tea, but everybody's got different flavors of things that they like. There are lots of other types of flavored teas. I think everybody's familiar with the San Francisco orange cinnamon-y type tea. Constant Comment is an orange-based tea. Gosh, I told you about my caramel, adding things like mango, okay? Mango tea. This is a black tea with mango, dried mango in it that I love. They only sell this at Trader Joe's in the summer, so it's gone already. But that's what I make my iced tea in every day. And for iced tea, one of the best ways I think to brew iced tea is to cold brew it. So the typical thing, if you look up iced tea on the internet, how do I make iced tea? They're going to tell you to boil water, pour it over the tea, let it sit, strain the tea, and then refrigerate. Another very popular way to make tea is sun tea. So you put tea bags or even loose leaf tea in a pot of water, put it outside in the sun for several hours, and you have tea. But the same thing works in cold water. Put your tea bags into the cold water, cover it, stick it in the refrigerator, and a couple hours later, you have iced tea. It's also, what's nice about it is that it doesn't have any bitterness whatsoever because no heat has been added to it. And I find it very pleasant to eat, to drink. You can add as much tea or as little. This is like 3 tea bags for about 1.5 quarts of water, and it works really well for tea. Drink a lot of it in the summer. Okay. Let's see. English breakfast is a blend of the Assam tea, Ceylon tea, and Kenyan tea. So again, from the same tea plant, grown in 3 different places, are dried, processed, and then blended together. Irish breakfast tea, if you've ever tasted them side by side, it's sort of interesting. It's basically the same collection of different types of tea, but it's stronger, okay? It's a little bit more of the fermenting. There's another tea, a very flowery tea, Keenum tea, that's a blend as well. Some of you may know Lapsang Susang, which is a smoked tea. It's very interesting. It has sort of a gunpowdery, smoky flavor that takes a little bit of getting used to. You might try it sometime just for excitement. Chai tea, very, very popular. Chai tea, okay. This probably is, I don't know, it's flavored. Tai chi lattes, okay, are super, super popular. If you're having chai tea, there's a clove, cinnamon, ginger, honey, vanilla, of course, milk is in it, so it's very creamy, very delightful. Bubble tea is also, both chai and bubble tea have made tea a lot more popular in the United States over the last probably 10 years as well. Bubble tea comes from Taiwan. It came to the United States in about the 1980s, although I'd say more in the last 15 years. It's its biggest time frame, or in the 2000s. This is a black tea that's brewed and sweetened with both honey and sweetened condensed milk, and it has giant tapioca pearls in it that you drink and suck the tapioca through a straw. Great afternoon meal. I mean, it was very filling at the same time as being refreshing. Then so those are all sort of the black teas at that point. Green tea is called Sencha. This is most commonly a Japanese tea, but it does come from China. Again, it's in the processing, okay, that it occurs. And then the matcha that I mentioned for the Japanese tea ceremony is the green tea that's been ground into a fine powder. It has 15 times the nutrients of just the leaves. So that's the reason it's used for medicinal quantities. Besides the Japanese tea ceremony style, you'll also have matcha. People drink it from a gourd that has a stainless steel straw in it, and the powder is just left to sit and flavor it. You kind of stir it up, whisk it up sometimes, and then drink that. And it has a lot of health properties to it, as well as a little pick-me-up. So we talked about where teas grow. A couple of other things most people don't really realize is that tea is actually grown in the United States too. There are 3 spots, one not much, but there is some. Off the coast of South Carolina, there's a small tea plantation. Burlington, Washington, there's a small tea plantation. And then on the big island in Hawaii, on the Hilo side, they grow tea there as well. It's kind of funny because Kona is the other side of the island. That's where the coffee comes from. Okay, tea we mentioned is associated with good health. This goes back and forth. They prove things and somebody disproves it, but generally it's considered to be really good for us because it contains a lot of polyphenols, which are antioxidants that help to repair human cells, body cells. So people say that it'll help you with cardiovascular problems, obviously lowering cholesterol in that part. Some people think it helps with cancer, osteoporosis, diabetes, and all kinds of other different things. Contrary to popular belief, it's not just green tea that's good for you, but actually black tea as well. Okay, so green tea is a little less processed. I think it's a raw form of the tea, hence a little bit fresher. There's also a tea style called Robos. It's not really a tea, it actually works into that herbal tea or tisane that we were talking about. Robos is spelled Roobos. The Robos tea is called red tea sometimes. It's actually a whole different tree, a whole different plant. It grows in South Africa. The beauty of this particular tea is that it's really felt to lower cholesterol. Okay, it has a lot more of the polyphenols in it. So people use that. The beauty of it is also it has no caffeine. So again, it's like the herbal teas that have no caffeine. That one is the same thing. One of the best things about being a tea drinker versus a coffee drinker is that there isn't so much of the caffeine crash because of the antioxidants in the tea. The tea actually your body takes a lot longer for the caffeine to kick in, and also takes a lot longer. It's a slower process going up and going down, so you don't get that real crash to it. I know I can sit in a meeting sometimes and drink 4 glasses of iced tea, and I feel like I've got a caffeine rush, but it generally isn't the drop off. It actually smoothly goes down as well. No calories in tea, and it also is very hydrating, so you can drink iced tea or hot tea in place of some of your water for the day if you like. So it does work that way. Another thing that we use tea for medicinally is tea bags on our eyeballs. So if you have a bad night's sleep or you have puffy eyes or red eyes, a couple of moistened tea bags placed over your eyes, and then you lie down and rest for 10 or 15 minutes. It's supposed to kind of loosen up that and kind of solve the puffiness. It may also be the 10 or 15 minutes of resting that helps with that quite a bit too. Tea can reduce your stress. There have been several different tests and studies that show that it actually drinking tea reduces the stress hormones in our body. So again, we have this afternoon tea tradition, especially in the UK, where you should stop and sit. That also helps with the stress reduction. When you add the tea to it, you can relax a little bit. By the way, tea tree oil does not come from the tree. It's just called tea tree oil. It's another tree entirely, so there's nothing to do with it. All right, teas. Actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about English style tea because that's my favorite. And English tea is a whole thing. Okay, we know about English tea. In this country, we usually go to a tea shop, mostly for lunchtime. I think lunchtime is the thing when we have tea because there's so much food involved in it. But really the earliest tea time, you might have a cup of tea before you go to work or something, but it's called 11s. And guess what time you have that? Okay, about 11 o'clock in the morning. This is sort of like a coffee break. This is the tea break. And the tea break is about 11 o'clock. And that usually includes a scone or a muffin or something simple, just kind of a pick-me-up after working for several hours. That actually is relatively later addition to English style tea. It didn't start till the 20th century. But now again, it's like a coffee break. Afternoon tea, which is the tea that we're most familiar with, is sometimes called low tea. And the reason it's called low tea versus high tea, that will come in later, is that low tea, the aristocratic ladies would actually sit in low chairs with low tables to drink this tea and enjoy it. Think of it more as a dining room setting, a parlor setting where people were sitting around in their fanciest clothes and they were talking, 2 to 3 people at a time at these small tables and these low chairs. It was just a little bit different than sitting at a dining room table. Okay, high chairs, got high tea. Okay, foods for this tea. This is the tea we think of. You have scones, you have little finger sandwiches. You'll have sweets. It might be bread puddings, cakes, brownies, truffles, Just about anything you can think of can be added to this. You're probably familiar with the 3-tiered plate. It's a bigger plate, medium-sized plate, smaller plate with the sweets ending up on top. And you'll work your way through these different plates as you enjoy your cups of tea over several hours, or an hour at least. This tea was to hold you until a much later dinner. So it was an event, but it was also an afternoon break. There are cream teas. I don't know if you've heard of cream teas or not. Cornish and Devonshire cream teas. Cornish green tea. Well, are you familiar with Devonshire cream? Devonshire cream or clotted cream. We don't see it too much here. You can actually make it yourself if you want to. You can buy Devonshire cream in little glass containers now in the United States pretty easily. It is a product from raw milk. So you have to start with raw milk, and the raw milk is agitated and the butter fat rises to the top. So you get this very thick, creamy mixture at the top of it. That's spooned off, and that's your clotted cream. And that's served with scones. Clotted cream, lemon curd, jam. If you were having the Cornish tea, you're going to split your scone, and you're going to add the jam first, topped with the cream. Okay, this is very important. If it's a Devonshire cream tea, you actually start with the cream first and then the jam. Very, very important distinction. I've never done this. I've just read about it and thought it was pretty amusing that we have our traditions and we're going to stick with them. Easy way to remember that, if that's important to you, is that clotted cream is also referred to as Devonshire cream. So obviously they would start with the good stuff, which is the Devonshire cream, and then finish with the jam. High tea. I've made this mistake multiple times, not understanding before I started my research on teas. High tea is actually not the afternoon tea. High tea, high chairs, okay, sitting at the table, is primarily for people when they get home from work. Working people will often have their main meal in the middle of the day. So they take their break. You think of in Europe a lot, this occurs. They have the big meal in the middle of the day and then something lighter later in the evening. But they're hungry. They've been working, okay, since this. So they come home and they have a relatively hearty meal. But more often than not, it's going to be pastries, meats and cheeses, things like that, that more cold room temperature style of food. In Scotland, they also add heartier dishes, so hot dishes. So think of our suppers, if we have supper. In this country, we're pretty much dinner people. We have lighter lunches and heavier dinners. But this would be a little bit lighter, but still extremely filling. Some of the foods we've talked about, I've got a couple of scones here. I don't think you can see them quite as well, but these are some blueberry scones. You'll have a recipe for that in the recipe packet. Scones are actually scones, but I still pronounce them scones because I'm so used to it, are biscuits. So in the United States, we have biscuits, they have scones. The difference between a scone and a biscuit is biscuits are generally savory, although there are savory scones. And scones are very rich, okay? They're made with butter, usually, completely made with butter. They often have cream in them, so they are very, very rich. One scone could be as much as 800 calories, so to beware when you're having this sort of dry-looking scone somewhere. Scones can be made with whipping cream, as I mentioned. They can be made with buttermilk, but usually it's one of the two of those simply because those are thicker, textured liquids that go into the scones to keep the body of it. Butter, I usually make them with unsalted butter. I do have a video that I put together just recently that's on my YouTube page, so you can search me on YouTube, and it's Phyllis Carey Cooks. And I made blueberry scones very similar to the recipe you have. And I grate the butter. So take it out of the freezer, stick butter, and run it on a hand grater, and it grates very nicely. It's not hard to do. And what's nice about that is you have these little teeny tiny pieces of butter that actually mix into your dough very quickly, and they just thaw right into it. So it's much easier than trying to rub it in. I just stir it in now. If you're doing a savory scone, you're going to add no sugar to it. But generally scones, and another difference between biscuits and scones is that scones are sweet. I generally make them not too sweet, especially if I'm planning on adding lemon curd, or I'm going to add a jam to it so that they're not super duper sweet. So the recipe you'll see that I've given you is not going to be very sweet, but it is filled with lots of blueberries. If you're going to use fresh fruit in scones, the typical original scone had no fruit in it except for dried fruit. So it was very much of a dried fruit idea, currants for the first one. Raisins, dried cranberries, all that sort of stuff works really, really well. But I don't know, when I do teas here, And teas are often done for baby showers, wedding showers, ladies' luncheons. We go to tea shops primarily for lunch, but occasionally for afternoon tea as well. I kind of spread it out a little bit and try to do some things that maybe aren't terribly traditional. So I've given you some recipes in this packet today that aren't really totally traditional. There are some things that are very traditional. One of the most traditional things are finger sandwiches. I've given you a recipe for a cucumber sandwich, but I've done it slightly different. I've done a Benedictine mixture. Benedictine is, they bring out the spread at the Kentucky Derby. Okay, so it's a cucumber dill based on cream cheese. Okay, a little bit of green onions, tiny bit of mayonnaise, and you make sort of a, I want paste is a terrible word, but it's sort of like a spread that's placed between the pieces of bread and then cut into shapes. Shrimp salad, you have a recipe for that. A curry chicken salad with mangoes, you have a recipe for that as well. If I do 3 different styles of sandwich for a large tea, I would do 3 different ones, and I would cut them into different shapes. So fingers, squares, triangles. The best way to do the sandwiches is to put the spread in between the 2 pieces of bread and then cut off the crust. You waste a little bit of the filling, but then you get a nice clean cut to it, and you get lots of filling all the way through. Once you've made your sandwiches, place them on sheet trays, put very lightly dampened paper towels on the top, and then cover it well with plastic wrap, and you can actually assemble them ahead if you want to do that. They will last a day, but they're better the morning of the tea if possible. The scones work really, really nicely frozen, so you can make those ahead of time. I like to, these came out of the freezer because I made them last week. You can freeze them, you can thaw them, you can make them the day before, you can heat them up. So they're pretty easy to play around with. I've given you a recipe for a really good salad. If you're going to do big events, you probably want a big salad. So there's a spinach salad with an orange dressing, balsamic dressing in here. Lavash rolls, very untraditional for English, but the lavash bread. This particular one is spread with a mixture of cream cheese and goat cheese, and then it is rolled up with an arugula salad and prosciutto inside, and a little bit of chutney too. It's really, really pretty, and you can make a whole bunch of them ahead of time. If you're making a lot of little sandwiches, you want to look for some shortcuts. Sausage rolls, oh, my favorite thing. Sausage rolls are very popular, very, very necessary in English tea. And I've given you a recipe using puff pastry. So you can thaw the puff pastry, fill it with the raw sausage mixture, freeze it, slice it, and bake it. It's very simple, and they are so good as the sausage fat soaks into the rest of the mixture. I've also given you a recipe for an egg salad with smoked salmon, and it makes a wonderful salad sandwich as well. A fruit salad too, with a lime and ginger dressing. That's delicious at any time of year. It'd be great during this heat spell that we're having right now, to take all the different summer fruits and put them together. So at this point, I'm finished talking, at least for now. So if we have any questions.
Phyllis Carey's website, so you could find more information there on Phyllis Carey, the Casual Gourmet's information. I also want to remind you that we have free virtual classes at the community center, and you can find them all here. And also, a lot of you are asking about the recipes, and they're on this website here, ljcommunitycenter.org/Wednesday Connect. And I see a lot of questions, or a lot of info in the chat boxes. A lot of the questions were already answered by some of the people in the group already, but I just want to kind of read them because from Judy, she says, during the pandemic, I've watched a ton of British crime drama. When the cops knock on a door, the person to be questioned, even the bad guy, always offers tea. So it's obviously something that's accustomed there and many places. There was also a question that was asked. I know that squeezing out a tea bag isn't polite, but if you're in your own home where no one is watching, I do it. This is from Heidi. She says she tries to convince herself that she gets more flavor from the tea bag that way. Is she fooling herself?
No. Right. That gets that last little strong bit out of the tea bag. I'm even worse. I actually make 2 cups of tea out of 1 tea bag. So I don't squeeze it. I just set it onto a plate, and then later I come back and use it the second time. So I'm really bad. So just right away. I don't save them later than that particular drinking of tea, like till later in the day or anything. Or tomorrow, I'm not that bad, but I often do. But if you do give that last little bit, that squeeze, you're getting the really intense flavor that's stuck in the leaves. So sure, why not?
I feel vindicated.
I know that there's a few more questions, and we are at 11 o'clock. Phyllis, do you have a few more minutes to stick around? Any additional, Michelle? Go ahead.
Yeah, on the iced tea in the refrigerator, how long do you put it in there, or the bags, or?
It's ready in about 2 hours at the most. And you can then pull the tea bags out, or I just leave them in. I usually drink a pitcher a day.
What kind of tea would you recommend for iced tea in this method? Is there a particular?
Really, I usually try to use teas that are pretty basic. Now, this is a mango tea, as I mentioned, but your black teas work better. But I've made green tea iced tea as well. But the black teas are a little stronger. This particular tea that I'm drinking is a very light color to it. It's a black tea, but it's a light color. It's even if I make it stronger, it's still a fairly light golden color to it. It's all to your taste. You can make any kind of tea. English breakfast, Lipton. One thing we didn't talk about are flow-through tea bags. One thing that Lipton created. I noticed that Twinings has the flow-through tea bag versus just the flat tea. There's also kind of an interesting tea from somebody who contacted me recently called Sport Tea. And you're going to find all sorts of these healthy type teas that are infused with turmeric and other wonderful qualities, naturally slightly sweet with an orange flavor. Something like Sport Tea is being used now to invigorate your body. Okay, besides just the properties of tea, they're now starting to add other things that are healthy for you too. So it's an interesting, tea's an interesting thing. It's changing a little bit now too, which is fun.
Phyllis, there's a question from Rachel. She said, can you cold brew with loose leaf tea?
You can, certainly. It's a little more difficult because then you need to strain it, okay, unless you have a tea ball to put it in to control it, or there are infusers. There are pitchers very much like this that come with a long infuser that goes down into the center of it nowadays, and then you would just put loose tea in there, and that would contain it. So yes, you can. Okay, same things. It might take a little bit longer to infuse, but really not very long. First time I did this, it was like I was so surprised. I used to, make the sun tea, and I'd take it out there and then I'd forget about it, and the next day rolled around and there was the tea still sitting outside. So I found that this cold brew was just easier for me. But yes, it does work with loose leaf as well. Just you really need to either strain it or contain it while it's brewing.
Great. Patricia is not alone in her comment. She said, "You're making me hungry, Phyllis." And so we definitely recommend checking out Phyllis's YouTube channel where you have the blueberry scone recipe, right? So we're looking forward to that and to hopefully doing some more programs with Phyllis.
Thank you guys. It was really great to see all of you. It's been too long.
Bye.
Family too.
Thanks, Phyllis.
Thank you all for joining.
you.
Hope to see you all again soon. Take care. Thank you so much, Phyllis.
Bye-bye.
Bye.